Hey everyone, welcome back. So you said you wanted to dive into something kind of dense but really fascinating. Well, buckle up because we're tackling Marxism and form today.
A classic, and surprisingly relevant even today.
Right. You know how sometimes you feel like you're drowning in information, like it's just too much to process?
Totally.
Well, Jameson is dealing with that, like way back in the 70s. He's looking at how six major thinkers, big names like Adorno, Benjamin, Marcuse.
Oh, and Bloch, Lukács, and Sartre. Can't forget them.
Right, right. So they're all using Marxist ideas, but not just to analyze like specific books. Jameson's more interested in how they thought, their methods. He calls it dialectical.
It's a mouthful, right? But basically, dialectics is about seeing everything as connected, always changing because of these internal tensions.
So not just about finding like hidden communist messages in every novel.
Not quite. It's more like, think about baking bread. You've got your ingredients, flour, water, yeast. Each one on its own is pretty basic, right?
Yeah.
But it's the way they interact, the contradictions even, that make something totally new. That's what these thinkers are doing with literature. They're showing us the hidden stuff, the social and historical forces baked in.
So instead of making me a Marxist reader, this book is going to give me like X-ray vision for any book.
Exactly. It's about being a more critical, insightful reader, no matter what you believe.
That's actually really cool because I've definitely had those moments where I'm reading something and I'm like, am I missing something here? Like, what's the deeper meaning?
It can be like that sometimes, and these thinkers, they each have their own way of getting at that deeper meaning.
All right, so six thinkers, six unique perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we even begin? Okay, six thinkers, each with their own unique lens. Where do we even start?
Well, picture this. We're at a dinner party, right?
Okay.
But it's not just any dinner party. It's hosted by history's most interesting thinkers, and we get to go around the table and just soak up their ideas.
I like where this is going.
So first up, we've got Theodore Adorno.
Adorno. Isn't he supposed to be like kind of a downer?
Well, yeah, he could be a bit pessimistic.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. Even his writing style is kind of a reflection of that. It's dense, it's challenging. You really got to work for those insights.
Oh, he's not making it easy for us.
Not at all, but it's like he's fighting against that passive way of consuming information that he's critiquing.
Like he's saying, if you want to understand me, you're going to have to put in the effort.
Exactly. You see, Adorno's really worried about what he calls the culture industry. Basically the idea that art, entertainment, it's all become like mass-produced.
So we're overloaded with information. We're passively consuming.
And we lose that ability to, really think deeply about anything.
And Adorno was writing this before the internet, right? It's kind of eerie how relevant it still feels.
Totally. It's like he could see where things were headed.
So it's like that feeling of scrolling through endless feeds and just feeling numb.
Exactly. And he even sees it in places you wouldn't expect, like the concert hall.
Really?
He talks about how the whole setting, the audience's behavior, it all feeds into this passive consumption.
Wow. I never thought about it like that before, but it makes sense. Suddenly I'm questioning my Spotify habits.
Right. Okay, well, maybe we need someone to lighten the mood a little. Yeah.
Please.
Let's move on to Walter Benjamin, our resident optimist. He was fascinated by this idea of nostalgia.
Nostalgia? But like in a good way.
In a deep way. Not just missing the good old days, but this yearning for a time when things felt more whole, more connected.
So like finding a box of old photos and feeling this pang of, I don't know, longing for something you can't quite put your finger on.
Precisely. And for Benjamin, this longing is often expressed through our fascination with objects from the past, old photographs, outdated technology. He saw them as these little time capsules full of meaning.
It's like they hold a certain magic, right?
Exactly. He'd tell us to cherish those things because they connect us to something larger than ourselves.
Okay, so Adorno warns us about passive consumption. Benjamin reminds us to find meaning in the everyday. Who's next?
Let's talk about Herbert Marcuse. He was really big in the 60s, challenging this idea that more stuff equals more happiness.
Right, he was all about desire and freedom, wasn't he?
Exactly. He and another thinker, Schiller, they were both concerned about this tension between what we want as individuals and what society demands of us.
So it's that classic struggle, trying to balance our own desires with societal expectations. That's something I think about a lot, actually.
Absolutely. And Marquise argues that true freedom comes from finding a balance, not from just getting everything we think we want.
So it's not about unlimited gratification, it's about understanding our true desires in the first place.
Yes, and then acting on them in a way that doesn't infringe on others' freedom to do the same. He uses this term, Spieltrieb, this impulse to play. Yeah, like imagine a world where work and play are kind of the same thing, where we're free to express ourselves, but we're also responsible to each other.
Wow, that's a powerful image. Okay, so from the complexities of desire, where do we go next?
Let's shift gears to Ernst Bloch, who reminds us about the importance of hope, even when things feel bleak.
You mentioned his concept of the unconscious of the future. What's that all about?
So Bloch believes in the power of hope to actually drive social change. But it's not naive optimism. It's about recognizing those little glimmers of a better future that exist even in the present.
Like those moments when you see someone doing something kind for a stranger, and it gives you a little spark of hope for humanity.
Exactly. That's what Bloch calls the seeds of the future, those anticipatory glimpses of a better world that inspire us to fight for change. And often, these seeds are found in art, in literature. Which brings us to Georg Lukács. He believed that literature is a reflection of the concrete reality of its time.
Lukács. He's the one who was really into how art reflects history.
Absolutely. Lukács believed you couldn't separate a book from the world it came from.
Like the time period it was written in really matters.
Huge. He thought great literature, it doesn't just describe what's happening, it reveals the social and economic forces at play.
Okay, so like a novel written during, say, the Industrial Revolution.
It's not just going to be about steam engines, it'll capture the whole vibe of that era.
The anxieties, the changes, all of it.
Exactly. Everything's connected. He actually uses Balzac as an example.
Balzac. Wasn't he a Marxist?
Nope. But Lukács argues that his descriptions of factories, of all things.
Factories. How's that literary?
That's the thing. It's not just about the factories themselves, but how they transform everything around them.
The people, the whole community.
It's like those factories become characters themselves. And Jameson talks about how Lukács uses this great line. He says, Balzac's factory sees the reader with the hallucinatory vision of a concrete hell.
Concrete hell. Wow, okay, that's pretty intense.
Right. But even though Balzac wasn't directly criticizing capitalism, Lukács shows how those descriptions, they actually expose the dark side of all that progress.
Because it's not just progress. It's affecting real people's lives.
Exactly. And that's Lukács' whole point. It's about understanding how these bigger forces, economics, history, all of it, how it shapes our everyday experience.
It makes you look at those classic novels differently.
Yeah.
Like all those descriptions, maybe they're not so harmless after all.
Right. It makes you think. And speaking of making you think, that brings us to our final guest at this little intellectual dinner party, Jean-Paul Sartre.
Ah, Sartre. Mr. Existentialism himself.
The one and only.
Yeah.
And he kind of shakes things up here.
How so?
Well, all these other thinkers, they've been emphasizing how outside forces shape us, right? Historical forces, societal pressures.
Right.
Sartre comes in and reminds us that we're actually responsible for our own choices. We create meaning in a meaningless world.
Didn't he say something like existence precedes essence?
Boom! Exactly. We're not born with a purpose. It's our actions, our choices that shape who we become.
It's kind of a lot of pressure when you think about it.
It is. But it's also freeing, right, to realize we have the power to define ourselves, and that's why Sartre is so compelling. He forces us to confront that freedom and the responsibility that comes with it.
Wow, okay, so we've gone from Adorno's cultural critique to the power of individual choice with Sartre. We've covered pessimism, nostalgia, desire, hope, and the impact of history, all through these different lenses of literary analysis. This deep dive has been pretty wild.
It's been a whirlwind.
Yeah.
And we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully this gives everyone some new tools to think about literature and even their own lives.
I think a big takeaway is that there's always more to uncover, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're reading a book or just living our lives, these thinkers remind us to look for those deeper meanings, the hidden connections.
It's about asking why. Why this theme? Why this character? Why did the author tell the story this way?
And by asking those questions, we become more active participants, not just passive consumers.
Exactly. We start to see the world and ourselves in a whole new light.
Love it. So as we wrap up Marxism and Form, any final thoughts for our listeners?
If these thinkers writing decades ago were already grappling with issues that are even more relevant today, like how do we find meaning in a world saturated with information? How do we stay true to ourselves amidst all these societal pressures?
Yeah, that we.
That's the question, and it's one I hope our listeners will continue to explore.
I know, I certainly will. Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you're interested in learning more, we highly recommend checking out Marxism and Form for yourself. Until next time, stay curious, keep those minds engaged, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.